Welcome to Watching Trees Grow, a podcast by Troutwood. This is week 5 of office hours, where we follow along my journey teaching personal finance at the University of Pittsburgh. Teaching personal finance since the spring of 2016 at the university. This is the point in the semester, at least in my experiences, where you start to get to know the students a little bit better, and some start to open up. It's the midpoint, specific to where we are in the curriculum. This is the bridge from debt and budgeting to investing in opportunity, which my pulse always increases a little bit. I get more excited when we focus on the opportunity that young people have versus the mistake avoidance, the debt management piece. Recognizing both are equally important. But an observation I've learned for the Troutwood community is just broadly speaking, as a society, we are aware of our money mistakes. We're less aware of the opportunities we're missing out on financially. And I've observed a positive impact of peer pressure when students see or hear from other students who've taken really great early steps towards owning their financial future. So that's where we are today. That's what class was like. We do something that is fairly unique in the class that I do want to share and strongly encourage any educators listening in to potentially do something similar. We have, as you know, our speaker series for the Watching Trees Grow podcast, where we have interviewed just some domain experts in the investment arena. And each week I select one of those speaker series interviews, and I have my students listen to the past podcast episode and write 3 personal takeaways. And by personal takeaways, I mean action steps. What are 3 things they can personally apply to their own financial lives, learning from the expert whom we interviewed? Last week, we talked about this. We did Kwaku Obed. Kwaku is an investment consultant for Marquette Associates out of Chicago, a company that consults on $350 billion. They don't manage money. They just consult on the money, which allows them to be conflict-free in the finance industry. This week, we listened to Jonathan Brelsford, who is the director of investments for the Pittsburgh Foundation, a $1.3 billion organization here in Pittsburgh. It's a great past episode. Strongly encourage everyone to give it a listen. But what makes Jonathan's episode so interesting, and why I have my students listen to it, he was hired 1 year before the financial crisis. And he talks about that experience, and he talks about it in a very relatable and very calm way. When we discussed in class today, what were some of the takeaways, learning from someone like Jonathan, who helps manage a portfolio of $1.3 billion, there were 3 key takeaways. And by key, I mean, I probably over half of the students had one of these 3 categories as an area in which they could personally apply Jonathan's knowledge to their life. The first was the importance of staying calm and sticking to a plan. Remember, I said Jonathan was hired 1 year before the financial crisis. So 1 year into this job of his, he had experienced a pretty sharp decline in the stock market and in the foundation's portfolio. And for my students, it was really reassuring to hear him so calmly say, "We stuck to the plan." The second key takeaway was the importance of asset allocation, of diversifying my portfolio, and by diversifying at the asset class level, not necessarily individual stocks like so many of us think about as individuals. Jonathan talked about diversifying across stocks, bonds, real estate, the big asset classes, and then further diversifying underneath. So they appreciated his dialogue on asset allocation and how that can reduce risk. Then the third, and I'm proud that this was a takeaway because it is my personal favorite takeaway from Jonathan's interview. Jonathan talks about how through his experience with the Pittsburgh Foundation, managing a portfolio of this size to a goal, to a plan, an institutional world, that plan is called an investment policy statement. And I'm going to paraphrase the learning outcome, but my students understood through Jonathan that if they could build a portfolio, either via their 401k or their Roth IRA, that they could replicate what Jonathan does and Jonathan and his team do at the Pittsburgh Foundation with a spending policy of their own. And in simple terms, what that means is if a student is able to build a retirement portfolio of $1 million invested in a broad stock market index or diversified portfolio, they could apply a 5% spending policy. And what that means, using this $1 million portfolio example, is $50,000 could come out of the portfolio every year, be used to meet daily needs and wants in retirement, while the rest of that retirement portfolio continues to grow. I think this is so important, and we're going to talk more about this in both future podcast episodes and future office hours. Historically, as individuals, at least in my kind of observations, but historically, we as individuals have tried to spend our last dollar on our last day on earth, right? We model to make our money last as long as we do. And we're trying to create a movement of sorts where students realize what's possible if they start young, both in terms of building their own financial independence, their own financial wealth, achieving financial goals, their plan, but also leaving a legacy. And that's going to be a fun future podcast as well. We examine, the Milton Hershey story. So I'll give a teaser on that. But every young person has that opportunity today. And that's why I started this episode by saying I personally get more excited when the conversation shifts to opportunity versus the debt side of the conversation and the mistake avoidance. The other thing we did in class today, and this I think is something I would also recommend others do. We played a game of buy, sell, hold, which is Troutwood's investment simulation. It's an app available in the Apple Store. Buy, sell, hold. We played a game beginning in 1939. We chose 1939 as a class because that was the year that World War II began. By no means are we forecasting or predicting that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the start of a world war. But we went back in time and used buy, sell, hold to replicate at least the investment experience of what was a very terrible time in our world's history. And what was really amazing to observe and to watch using that example was the eyeballs of my students. Because buy, sell, hold uses real history. It uses a 42 unit, i.e. 42 year playthrough to replicate our career. And I think in their minds that an investment cycle that started at the onset of World War II was going to be a very difficult career cycle over which to make money for their retirement fund. And the numbers were very large. They learn through repetition that if they stick with it, if they stick to the plan, that while, yes, there are giant macroeconomic events that are out of their control, recognize just that these events are out of their control, stick to the plan when it comes to at least the pieces that you can control individually. So that was fun. It generated some good discussion, obviously some emotion as well with the current events. In summary, we've moved on to investing. We've moved from budgeting in debt to investing. We bridged that conversation the final few minutes of class by buying a car on Kelley Blue Book and then buying a home on realtor.com. And then as a class saying, wait, I'm having second thoughts. I'm going to buy a cheaper car and a cheaper home. And that was a really fun example because we took the difference in price between the two cars and the two homes and used that to start our Roth IRA. Educators listening, intentionally, we did not spend a whole lot of time even talking about what a Roth IRA was. That was intentional. The wow factor of showing what's possible was enough to really, I think, get interest and excitement for next week when we dive into both the Roth IRA and the 401k. So stay tuned. That's what's coming next week. Appreciate you tuning in to this episode of Watching Trees Grow and Office Hours. I'm Gene Natali.